Okay, I want to go over the end of Reconstruction. We're going to go back and review a little bit as we go through this, okay? Reconstruction lasted from 1865 to 1877. We'll go over why it ended in 77 here at the end of this slideshow. Just as a review, looking at this is what the Civil War looked like. You've got your northern states in blue, your border states there in green, and then in the gray are your Confederate states. There are three things we kind of look at when we talk about Reconstruction: the economy, the political side of things, and the social side of things. Obviously, the economy in the South is absolutely destroyed because of the war. Politically, how are we going to admit Southern states back into the Union and change the Constitution to make sure it doesn't happen again? And how has life changed for white and black Southerners during Reconstruction? Reconstruction starts with the end of the Civil War. Lincoln, during the Civil War, is already creating plans for how he believes we should readmit those southern states. And it was very forgiving. His idea was obviously those states would abolish slavery. Within those states, if 10% of the people within those states swear loyalty to the Union and they create new state governments, they would be allowed back into the Union as long as no former Confederates were part of the government. On the other side of things in Congress are the radical Republicans who kind of wanted to be more punishing and a little harder. Obviously, about abolish slavery, they wanted the majority of each state, so 50% plus, to swear loyalty to the North and create new state governments. No former Confederates in government, and then they wanted to give black people the right to vote, or black men the right to vote. South is devastated from the war. We've talked about that. We know the towns are burned, farmlands wasted, infrastructure is destroyed. Reminder: infrastructure, roads, schools, bridges, government buildings, things like that, just destroyed. You see the number dead there, and a lot of civilians are homeless and broke because the war happened in their front and backyards. Lincoln is killed after the Civil War, and his vice president Johnson takes over as president. Johnson was a Southerner. He wants to take a hands-off approach with Reconstruction. He wants those Southern states to be readmitted quickly. They do have to pass the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, but he's going to allow former Confederates to get back into the government. He's going to want a more Southern sympathetic way of allowing things to go back to normal. He does give black people some rights to marry, buy property, access to courts, things like that, but not a ton. With letting those former Confederates back into office, he's going to allow a lot of those old ideas to continue. That's his plan for Reconstruction. There is a Freedmen's Bureau established, which is going to assist freed slaves. One of the Union generals during the war signed an order saying they were going to give former Confederate land to former slaves. Each slave would get, or family would get 40 acres and a mule. The Freedmen's Bureau started 4,300 schools, education program. We end up with public education. However, black codes become a thing, which denied blacks some rights: the rights to bear arms, the right to assembly. These things were designed to stop equality. But by 1866, all Southern states are back in. Johnson's Reconstruction ideas, some of those take place, but Congress is going to kind of have the final say. They passed a couple of laws. The Civil Rights Bill of 1866, which makes all African American citizens that can own property and get the rights that citizens get. And then the more important one is the Military Reconstruction Act. They're going to make those southern states follow the law. They are going to go in and split the South up into military districts that are controlled by military generals to make sure that they follow what the federal law is regarding former slaves. So you see here's a map, the 6 districts that are formed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I counted correctly. There's conflict in Reconstruction. They have debates over ratification over a couple of new amendments. The 14th Amendment, which gives everyone equal protection as citizens and says that anyone born in the United States is an automatic citizen of the United States. And the 15th Amendment, which gives African American men the right to vote. We still haven't given women the right to vote at this point. There are property rights, but Johnson decides he's giving all that land back to former Confederates, and he believes they shouldn't have lost their land. Um, so Johnson and Congress, they have conflict. They have conflict over Johnson's authority in hiring in government. They actually impeach Johnson based on the fact that he thought he could fire people in his government, and the Senate said he couldn't. It's a long story, but he ends up being acquitted by the Senate, which means he's not found guilty. Okay, impeachment is basically just a trial that happens in the Senate. He's acquitted by the Senate by a 19 to 35 vote. So what's life like in the New South during Reconstruction? You get new voters, African American voters. They're not educated, they're not well prepared, but they're willing to learn. They want to take part in this new idea. There's not a major push to integrate white people with black people from either side. They're okay right now just kind of keeping to themselves. You end up with people from the North traveling south to live, to gain access to government. They want to have power. They want that, with that power comes money. So you end up with people from the North coming south. Now, they promoted black suffrage, which means the right to vote, because they're going to say the right things and feel like they can get those voters to vote for them. They also want to build a government that's friendly to their business interests so they can make money. Economic changes in the South, you get thousands of miles of new railroad, tobacco industry, but you end up with African Americans becoming tenant farmers and sharecroppers, which basically becomes a new form of slavery. You work for somebody to work their land, but you end up at the end of the month owing them money. So now you're tied to that land, and you don't get to live as free as somebody else. There's a change in government. Voting restrictions are removed. Public education begins. You end up with a lot more African Americans in government offices, federal, state, local government offices. But that government's not well liked by some of the old guard Southerners. Obviously, they don't like that change. They don't like to see people that they thought of as property become leaders in government. President Grant takes over after President Johnson's time in office is over. President Grant is not a great president. Even though Ulysses Grant was a great general, he did not become a great president. He was pretty alcoholic, and he hired a lot of his friends in government, and they were very corrupt. So there's a lot of corruption throughout the country. There's terrorism. KKK forms, which initially forms to stop black participation in government or in regular social life in the South. They use terrorism like burning down houses and intimidation, things like that. So why did Reconstruction end? Well, the reason why people wanted Reconstruction to end was they weren't seeing the results they wanted, especially in the South. You could say people got tired of all the drama. Anytime there's change, I guess it feels like drama for people. And then normal, I would put in quotation marks. We didn't necessarily want normal, but they wanted in the South normal and stability. So there's an election, a presidential election in 1876. It basically comes down to a tie and goes to Congress to decide who's going to be the next president. And Congress's compromise is they're going to allow the northern guy to become president, Rutherford B. Hayes. But in return, the North has to pull the military out of the South. No more of those military districts. You can imagine when enforcement of laws goes away, a lot of those laws are going to go away. So that becomes the end of Reconstruction. What's life like for black people in the South now? Black people live in poverty. The outlook is bleak. There's not a lot of optimism for the future. The sharecroppers, like I said, kind of become another form of slavery. They're not growing a lot. They're not getting a lot from the land, and the people that own that land are going to take advantage of them. Industry starts to build in the South a little bit. Cities start to build up a little bit, but black people are not allowed to be a part, in a lot of cases, of those new industries. Black people are thought of as second-class citizens. New laws are put into place to keep things separate. it becomes easy to fire, especially black people, if they don't do exactly what they're asked. There is education, but it's not well funded, so it just isn't great for um, those former slaves. So, conclusion. You don't end up with full equality through Reconstruction. In a lot of ways, it's closer to pre-Civil War than post-Civil War. Severe restrictions in the South, land given back to the Confederates that was given to those former slaves so they could build a life. Churches and communities are used to help ease difficulties, but again, there's not a lot of money there. You end up with kind of the seeds of equality, but they're just not taking place yet. White people in the South, they're not going to accept black people. It's going to take generations and generations. They still saw black people as inferior. And by the way, this is in the North as well. This isn't just a Southern problem. Consequence, you end up with a harsh system of segregation designed to reinforce the status quo.